Okay, so we're talking about the Compromise of 1850, which was a large, ended up being a large bill, which means a large proposed law that included a lot of different parts to it, which is very common in Congress. So, the first discussion before we get into the Compromise of 1850 is, should the American anti slavery society spend time and money opposing racial discrimination in the North as well as attempting to end slavery in the South? So, this again goes back to the idea of limited resources. Everybody in this time period, especially abolitionists, didn't have a lot of money. They maybe had 80, 50, 40 extra dollars at their disposal. Some maybe only had 20, some maybe only had $10. And we're going to decide where that tiny amount of money is going to go. The question is, does it go in your tiny amount of time that you have? Is it going to go to energy and efforts to oppose racial discrimination in the North, which is very real and very terrible? Job inequalities, pay inequalities, people segregation. Or does it all go to ending slavery in the South? Does it go to helping freed people? Or does it go to helping Harriet Tubman and other conductors of the Underground Railroad get people to freedom? Which do you help when you have limited resources and time? Ideally, we can help both. But as abolitionists in 1850, we can't. So, which one do you think, or maybe we divide our money? Is it $5 for one and $5 for another, or is it $10 just to help end slavery? Because we know that this is the worst of the crimes. So, that's the first discussion question. To either write bulleted responses or again to generate one of those other choices. Moving on to the Compromise of 1850. So, if you remember in the fall, we talked about the Mexican War. And I mentioned when I was talking about the Mexican War and the Texas Revolution that both of them were going to lead to big controversies over what was going to happen in those states. Were we going to allow, as a country, were we going to allow enslavement of people in those states when they became states? So when New Mexico became a state, was slavery going to be legal in that state or not? And believe it or not, it was a huge, huge issue. It was a hotly contested issue for many Northerners and many Southerners. Many Northerners, like Abraham Lincoln and others, were very much opposed to letting slavery spread. To Abraham Lincoln and many others, slavery could stay in the South, but it could not be in New Mexico or Utah or California or Texas. He didn't want it anywhere west of the Mississippi River. So, here's the big question. A big issue is also because the original Missouri Compromise line was right here. This is the 3630 parallel that the Missouri Compromise had, quote, quote, solved. Well, when California wants to become a state, the 3630 is going to go right through California. So that's not going to work for California, which is one of the big reasons that this Compromise of 1850 had to happen. Because all the other states fall below or above that line, which meant that, New Mexico and Utah or New Mexico and Arizona would have become, slavery would have been legal, but California wasn't solved. So they had to do something different from the Missouri Compromise. They had to change the rules. And so it became part of a big debate in Washington, D.C. What's going to happen with California, Nevada, Utah, all these states, Texas included? So the South wants all the territories open to slavery. They also were getting really frustrated with the successes of the Underground Railroad. So they want to strengthen the already existing fugitive slave law to make it even stronger and force more Northerners to participate. The North wants all territories west closed to slavery, and that was really the biggest issue they care about. And they also don't want anything to do with strengthening the fugitive slave law. This wasn't as big of a deal to them initially. So Henry Clay makes this famous proposal. He reads this dying letter from John C. Calhoun, who's like a super pro-slavery guy, and just makes this super impassioned speech about the fugitive slave law and opening territories to slavery, and makes all sorts of convincing to the Congress people arguments. So a compromise is when everybody gets a little bit of what they want and everybody gives up a little bit about. The idea is that we're going to be balanced. So we're going to have both people are going to get a little bit. So what ends up happening in the Compromise of 1850, all the territories except for California will be open to African American slavery if people choose it. So basically, in all these territories, it's called popular sovereignty, and the people of Utah can vote to decide whether they want to allow slavery or not when they become a state. And if New Mexico wants to become a state, they can vote whether to allow slavery or not. Texas already really was pretty much a slave state at this point, so we pretty much gave up that, and they just kind of let that go. And plus, that's under the 36th parallel line. California is going to ban African American slavery. They're going to continue practicing Native American enslavement, but they called it a free state because they didn't see the Native American people as actual citizens of the United States. So they just said, oh, it's a free state, and this is all going to be left as unorganized territory. We're not going to deal with it. Not theoretically, it's going to be free for right now. And the rest of the states are going to stay the same. So that was part of the compromise. These states are going to be open to slavery if people want them, and this state is going to be free. That was a big, quote, quote, concession. So here's just a bigger picture of the same thing. So the fugitive slave law, unfortunately, was super strengthened. It was really, really bad for the benefit and really harmful for those people. So, it created a new category of federal officials that of U.S. commissioners appointed by a federal judge and authorized to hear the case of an accused fugitive and to issue a certificate of removal, a document that could be not challenged in court. So basically, the fugitive could not claim a right of habeas corpus, meaning the right to a lawyer in a trial if they're accused, or testify at the hearing. So a document from the owner's state with a physical description of the accused. The commissioner would receive a fee of $5 if he could decide it against the owner and $10 if he issued a certificate. So basically, this meant that people could say, hey, that random person is my fugitive slave. And that fugitive slave could not go to trial to defend himself. It could be a free person. It could be a completely free, legitimate by law, by a will, born free. And any Euro-American could claim them as their fugitive slave, and a commissioner would receive $10. If that commissioner said, oh, yep, that's a fugitive, it needs to go back, and it needs to be, you need to return that you need to take that person, and that you need to go back. And so this poor African American person would not have a right to a trial or anything. It would just be, and the commissioner would get that money. Federal marshals could basically make individuals to carry out a commissioner's orders and call on the assistance of local officials and bystanders. Meaning some random Euro-American who doesn't believe in slavery could be forced to go hunt, quote, quote, down fugitives. They could be, anybody could like come in your house at any time and be looking for, quote, quote, fugitives and take away anybody that they find, whether they're free or not, they could take them away without the right to a trial. And there was a lot, huge fines and civil and criminal penalties for anybody who helped fugitive slaves or interfered with their capture, and as well as for the law people who failed to carry out an order. No action by a state or local judge, no local law could interfere with the process. And basically, so if a state said it was legal to enter somebody's home, it didn't really matter. And to help, the federal government at its own expense could deliver the fugitive to his or her owner. And it was retroactive, so would apply to all the enslaved people who had run away in the past, including those who had been law-abiding residents of the free states for many years. So it did made worse the kidnappings of free people even more frequent. And so it made the Southerners somewhat happy, and it roused the Northerners incredibly. It was something that made them super angry, especially to the fact that like there was it's a violation of a lot of personal liberty laws that made people, little forces, and it could be used. Any bystander, innocent person can be forced to help capture, quote, enslaved people. It could really jeopardize the safety of any free African American living in America, anywhere. So the discussion number 2 is on whether the American Anti-Slavery Society should support armed attempts to resist enforcement of the fugitive slave law. So, for example, should people send out people with guns to help protect and try to shoot down, if needed, these slave catchers who are commissioners who are trying to arrest people and capture enslaved people and free people? Or should it just be a peaceful measure to get as many people to Canada as possible so that the slave catchers and commissioners and local officials do not start sending a ton of people back into slavery? So again, you can respond to the Compromise of 1850, especially these new measures of the Fugitive Slave Act, in a journal response or letter to the editor, as a historical fiction story, as a letter to a loved one, and a cartoon or illustration, or you can respond to this question in bullet point form and come to class with a lot of notes. And this should hopefully generate a lot of thought and discussions. Maybe think about kind of give the pros and cons of each, the negatives and the positives of armed attempts and resist enforcement, and then think about, how would that work? So that's the end of this one.